Most people move through life without ever consciously choosing who they are, not because they don't care, but because they've never been told that identity is a decision. From the moment we're born, identities begin to attach themselves to us, our name, our gender, our race, our culture. These are real and important, yes, but they're only the surface. Beneath those layers is the deeper truth. Who you become is not something inherited, it's something forged. If you don't make that choice, someone else will. And often, they'll decide in ways that serve their comfort, not your truth. Society is quick to assign roles. It's efficient, you're quiet, so you must be weak. You're emotional, so you must be irrational. You succeed, and they call you lucky. You fail, and they call you a waste. These are not truths, they're projections. They are what the world uses to make sense of you quickly, without doing the hard work of actually knowing you. But if you accept those roles without resistance, they start to shape you, not because they're accurate, but because repetition breeds belief. Identity, when left unattended, becomes a collage of borrowed definitions. And it's easy to fall into that trap. The world hands you scripts, what to wear, how to speak, what success should look like. It rewards conformity and punishes disruption. But every time you let others define you, you surrender a piece of your freedom. You dilute your presence. You become a shadow of someone else's expectations. Over time, that becomes a habit, and then a lifestyle, and eventually a quiet resignation. Philosophically, identity is both constructed and discovered. It's shaped by your context, yes, your environment, your relationships, your past, but it's also something you author. That authorship is an act of courage. It means asking yourself uncomfortable questions. What do I value? What do I refuse to be? What am I willing to stand for, even if it costs me? Those questions aren't always easy to answer, but they are essential. Without them, you become a character in someone else's narrative. Psychologically, when you define yourself intentionally, you create internal coherence, a sense of integrity between what you think, what you say, and what you do. That alignment is what builds resilience. It gives you a compass when the world pulls you in 100 directions. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes you more equipped to face it on your own terms. Without that inner clarity, you're vulnerable to manipulation from marketing, politics, even from people who claim to love you but only love the version of you that doesn't challenge them. So the real question is, are you living a life that's authored or assigned? Are you a mirror reflecting everyone else's ideas back at them, or are you a window transparent, intentional, and self-defined? Because if you don't decide who you are, someone else will, and their version of you will always be smaller than the one you're capable of becoming. There's a hard truth many people don't like to admit. The world often benefits more from your conformity than from your authenticity. It sounds harsh, but it's real. When you don't decide who you are, when you leave that question blank, you make yourself easier to manage, easier to market to, easier to control. In that vacuum of self-definition, systems step in. Institutions, corporations, even cultural norms begin to write your script for you, and not necessarily out of malice often, just out of habit. But the effect is the same. You become less of a person and more of a product. Think about how society operates. It thrives on predictability. The more you behave according to pattern, the more efficiently it can categorize you. Your preferences, your attention, your fears, they all become data points. And the less conscious you are of your identity, the more valuable you are as a passive consumer. There's profit in your indecision. There's power in your submission. The less you know about who you are, the more susceptible you are to people who claim to know what you should want. And the machine is sophisticated. It doesn't just sell you products. It sells you roles, prepackaged identities that come with instructions. You're a certain age. Here's who you're supposed to be. You're in a certain social class. Here's what you should care about. You're from this part of the world. This is how you should think, vote, dress, speak, dream. And if you don't question it, it feels natural. It feels like choice, but it's not. It's conditioning. Psychologically, this matters deeply. When you allow external forces to shape your identity unchecked, you create a dissonance inside yourself. You begin to feel disconnected, unsure, vaguely dissatisfied. You might look successful on the outside, but inside there's a low hum of confusion, like something important got lost in translation. That's not coincidence. That's the cost of surrendering authorship over your own narrative. And let's be clear, this isn't about rejecting everything society offers. Some traditions, some roles, some expectations are rooted in real wisdom, but the key is discernment. The key is deciding for yourself what fits and what doesn't. That kind of self-examination takes effort. It requires vigilance, and often it requires you to step outside the roles that were designed for your convenience, not your growth. Philosophically, this is the difference between living a reactive life and a reflective one. The reactive life waits to be told what matters. The reflective life asks and then listens, and that inquiry can be uncomfortable, even isolating, but it's the only path to genuine freedom. So the next time you feel the pressure to fall in line, to accept a label, a path, a version of yourself that feels suspiciously easy, ask yourself, who profits if I comply? Who gains if I stay silent? And more importantly, what do I lose if I don't define myself? Because when you don't decide who you are, the world won't leave you undefined. It will define you for its own benefit and then ask you to thank it for the favor. Your voice, and I don't just mean the sound you make when you speak, is the most powerful expression of who you are. It's not just communication, it's identity in motion. When you articulate what you believe, what you feel, what you know deep in your bones, you're doing more than talking. You're placing a marker in the world. You're saying, asterisk, this is where I stand, asterisk. And that's not just an act of self-expression, it's an act of self-creation. In psychological terms, using your voice consistently builds what's called self-congruence, the alignment between your inner values and your outer actions. And when that alignment exists, it breeds integrity, not moral superiority, but a sense of wholeness. When your words match your beliefs and your actions match your words, you move through the world with clarity. You're not performing, you're being. That's rare. And it's unmistakable when you see it. But here's the problem: many people silence themselves, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned that being quiet is safer. Somewhere along the line, someone convinced them that their truth was inconvenient, that it was too loud, too strange, too emotional, too intense. So they dialed it down, they shrank, they swapped authenticity for approval. And once you start doing that, it gets harder and harder to remember what your real voice even sounded like. The danger here isn't just that you go unheard, it's that you forget how to hear yourself. Over time, silence doesn't just cover your truth, it erodes it, and that internal erosion can be subtle. You stop speaking up in meetings. You stop saying no when you need to. You stop pushing back when something feels wrong. You begin to speak in ways that are polite predictable, and hollow until you start believing that version of yourself is who you are. But reclaiming your voice is not about volume, it's about precision. It's about knowing what matters to you and being willing to name it, even if it's inconvenient, even if it makes the room uncomfortable. Because discomfort isn't always a sign you're doing something wrong. Often, it's a sign you're touching something real. Philosophically, your voice is your anchor. It grounds you in a world that constantly shifts. And when you use it with intention, it becomes more than self-defense, it becomes self-definition. You teach the world how to treat you by showing them who you are. And you teach yourself how to live by practicing truth in every sentence. This doesn't mean you have to speak all the time. Sometimes silence is powerful too, but silence should be a choice, not a habit formed from fear. Because when you choose to speak clearly, honestly, without apology, you remind yourself that you exist, that you are not just a reflection of your surroundings, but a source of something original. So ask yourself, are you using your voice to echo others or to define yourself? Because if you're not speaking your truth, someone else will speak for you and their words will never carry the weight of your own. We live in a world obsessed with labels. They're everywhere on job titles, social media profiles, even the way we casually describe people in conversation. Smart, lazy, driven, introverted, toxic, these labels are shortcuts. They give us the illusion that we understand someone or that someone understands us in a neat, packaged way. But labels, while convenient, are dangerously reductive. They take something complex, layered, evolving like a human being and flatten it into something static, one-dimensional, and easy to dismiss. The truth is, labels aren't designed to capture your essence. They're designed to make you easier to manage. When people don't want to take the time or energy to truly understand you, they assign you a role, a word, an identity and move on. It's efficient, but it's also lazy. And if you're not careful, you'll start believing those words, not because they're true, but because they get repeated enough that they start to feel real. There's a psychological phenomenon called the labeling effect. Once someone labels you, their brain begins filtering your actions through that label. If you're labeled difficult, every time you ask a question, it's interpreted as resistance. If you're labeled gifted, any mistake you make becomes a crisis, not just a human error. People see what they expect to see, and here's the crucial point, you start to see it too. Internalized labels shape behavior. They can become self-fulfilling prophecies, not because you chose them, but because you absorb them. But here's where the philosophical depth comes in. No word, not a single one, is big enough to hold a whole human being. You are not a brand. You are not a category. You are not a personality type in a quiz. You are a process, a paradox, a living contradiction. You are joy and grief, strength and fragility, clarity and confusion, sometimes all in the same moment. And that's not dysfunction. That's what being human looks like when you stop reducing yourself to other people's definitions. Now, that doesn't mean all labels are malicious. Some people use them to connect, to belong, to find language for what was previously unnamed. That can be powerful, but the difference is intention. Are you choosing your labels as tools for understanding, or are you accepting them as limits on your becoming? That's the question that matters, and here's the challenge. Resisting labels means accepting the discomfort of being misunderstood. It means giving up the quick relief of fitting in for the slower, more demanding process of being fully seen. But once you begin to live beyond labels, you start reclaiming your complexity. You stop editing yourself to fit the expectations of others. You make room for your own contradictions, and that, paradoxically, is what makes you more whole. So the next time someone tries to tell you who you are in one word, one phrase, one box, ask yourself, is this a mirror or is it a muzzle? Because labels can describe you, but they can never define you. That's your job, and it always will be. Silence is not neutral. People like to think it is, that if they don't speak up, they're simply staying out of the way, keeping the peace, minding their own business. But in reality, silence is always saying something. When you don't speak, others fill in the blanks. They interpret your quiet as agreement or apathy or weakness, sometimes all three. And in a world that's constantly trying to tell you who you are, your silence can be mistaken as consent to a version of you that you never chose. Psychologically, this is called the illusion of transparency. You assume people understand your thoughts and intentions, even when you don't voice them, but they don't. They rarely do. And so your internal resistance, your discomfort, your doubt, your disagreement never leaves your mind. It just stays there, silent and invisible, while the world keeps spinning in ways you fundamentally don't align with. When you stay quiet in the face of misrepresentation, whether it's about your identity, your values, or your beliefs, you're allowing others to define the narrative. Not actively, but passively, and passivity has consequences. When someone misinterprets your silence as endorsement, they act accordingly. They put you in the wrong category, hand you the wrong script, expect you to play the wrong role. And the longer that performance goes on, the harder it becomes to correct it. Now, I'm not talking about strategic silence, the kind born of wisdom, timing, or intentional restraint. I'm talking about habitual silence, the kind rooted in fear, in doubt, in the hope that if you just stay small enough, still enough, invisible enough, you'll avoid conflict. But conflict avoided isn't always peace gained. Sometimes it's clarity delayed. And every time you choose not to clarify who you are, you give someone else more room to decide for you. Philosophically, silence is a powerful paradox. It can be a space of reflection or a mask for avoidance. And only you can know the difference. But if you're using silence to hide from truth, your truth, then it slowly becomes a cage. It doesn't just keep the world out. It keeps you in. Your ideas stay unspoken. Your boundaries stay uncrossed. Your potential stays untapped, not because it isn't there, but because you never gave it voice. And here's where it gets more personal. People often say they don't understand me. But the question is, have you ever really shown them who you are? Not just the curated version, the real one. The part of you that has edges, contradictions, non-negotiables. If not, what you're experiencing may not be misunderstanding, it may be misrepresentation you accidentally helped create by never speaking up. So the next time you're tempted to say nothing, to shrink, to nod, to let it slide, pause and ask yourself, will my silence protect me or erase me? Because if you never speak your truth, don't be surprised when others write a story that never had your name on the cover. There's a deeper cost to not choosing who you are, a cost that doesn't show up all at once, but reveals itself over time. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up as that subtle emptiness you feel in rooms where you're celebrated but not seen. It appears in the form of a successful life that looks good on paper, but feels strangely disconnected from your inner self. This is what happens when you hand over authorship of your identity to others. You become fluent in the language of expectation, but illiterate in the language of your own truth. Psychologically, this is identity diffusion, when your sense of self remains fragmented, undefined, because you've never fully claimed it. It's not the absence of experience, it's the absence of reflection. You may have lived through countless situations, played numerous roles, worn different masks, but if you've never stopped to ask, asterisk, who am I beneath all of it? Asterisk, then none of it roots. It just floats, disconnected. Over time, that disconnection starts to take a toll. You begin to feel like a stranger in your own life. The decisions you make aren't really asterisk, yours asterisk, they're reactions, accommodations, compromises. You say yes when you mean no. You pursue goals that never quite satisfy. You build relationships based on the version of yourself you think will be accepted, not the one that's real. And slowly, you lose the thread of who you were meant to become, not because you weren't capable, but because you never stopped long enough to ask what asterisk your asterisk becoming was supposed to look like. Philosophically, this touches on the concept of asterisk existential authorship, asterisk the idea that we are not merely products of circumstance, but authors of meaning. We are not here to be defined by the world. We are here to define our relationship to it. And that requires choice, deliberate, sometimes difficult, often uncomfortable choice. But without it, life becomes a sequence of events that happen asterisk to asterisk you, not a story you shape from within. The danger isn't that you'll become someone else. It's that you'll become no one in particular, a ghost moving through other people's definitions, adapting, pleasing, performing until one day you wake up and realize you've spent years living someone else's idea of success. And that's a loss no one else will grieve but you. But here's the good news. The moment you decide to take ownership, to ask the hard questions, to listen to your own voice, to reject the roles that shrink you, you begin to reclaim what's been lost. It doesn't matter how long you've lived by default. Meaning is not found in the past. It's created in the present, in the very moment you choose to show up as yourself, fully, without disguise. So if you've been waiting for permission to decide who you are, stop waiting. Because the longer you delay that decision, the louder the world becomes and the quieter you get. And eventually, if you don't choose your life, someone else will choose it for you and call it fate.